Hey everybody, Nonnie here. A lot of you have asked me for some information about campsites, tents, and shelters. Several of you wondered why I stayed in a shelter as opposed to staying in a tent, and I did not have a problem staying in a tent at all. I stayed in a shelter during the winter months because I felt like it was safer, and the reason why is because it was so windy, so stormy, rainy, snowing, that it was just a lot easier for me to stay in the shelter and not have to worry about the tree branches falling or trees falling over, trees breaking off and pummeling into the ground. Even when you're in a place where you feel there are no widowmakers above you, um, those trees, they snap off, the trees fall over, the branches break off. I was with another set of hikers that shared with me that the evening before they had set up their tent, even though those conditions had been, as I was just describing, cold, windy, rainy. And a tree actually broke off and pummeled into the ground just ended up standing straight up because it had broken off and just stuck straight into the ground, and it was only about 3 feet from their tent. That made me even more convicted about wanting to stay in a shelter in the evenings. Now, when you're hiking, if you start before the large pack, the large group of people, that's not too hard to get a position in a shelter. But if you start when most of the other people are starting, then it's very, very difficult to find space in a shelter. Some of those shelters only house up to 6 people, some 5 people, some 15 people. You have to go by AWOL's guide, and it will indicate on there how big the shelter is. The next question I get is, well, if you stayed in a shelter, what about the mice? You would think that there would not be mice that would come out in the wintertime, but that is not true. Those mice are there. And that was a real problem, a very big challenge in Georgia and in North Carolina with mice getting into the packs, chewing through the packs, chewing through all kinds of things. I didn't have a problem, but other people around me had a problem. And mice are real, and so you just are going to have to come to the conclusion that it's better for you to sleep in a shelter and deal with mice in Georgia and North Carolina than it is to be in a tent. And setting that up either in the rain or the snow or the sleet, the hail. You could have good weather, and that's not an issue at all, and I'm sure there were plenty of hikers that did that. But for me, it worked out best to stay in a shelter, and I just dealt with the mice. A lot of hikers don't like staying in the shelters because of the mice. Once it turned dark, it didn't take long before the mice started to come out, and sometimes there would be anywhere from 1 to 2 to up to 15, and that is because we had a flashlight and we could count them one night. There were 15 in the shelter, and it was a shelter for 6 people. That was a lot of mice. That was in Georgia. And the best thing to do is to make sure that you have your food and anything that is scented out of your backpack and remember to empty the pockets on your backpack. A lot of people don't remember to do that, and it's important, and I'll tell you why. First of all, you need to have all your food and scented items in a bear bag and put away in the evening anyway. They shouldn't be in your pack. But if you have forgotten anything, those mice are going to find it. The best thing to do is to make sure that you empty everything out and leave the zippers open on your pockets where the mice can get into the pockets and come out at their own will. If you don't do that, they're going to chew through the zippers and they will chew through the pockets to get inside there, even if there's nothing in there. That could just be a crumb that they smell. And there were several hikers that experienced that. I fortunately did not, but I saw that others did. For those of you that bring books with you, you need to know that Mice consider that nesting material, and if you don't think that that has a scent, it may not, but the mice know that that paper is in there, and several individuals that had small books with them, mice had chewed through their bags, chewed through their zippers, and gotten in there and chewed up the books in order to get the nesting materials out and come back out. So the best advice that I can give is to leave the top of your backpack open where the mice can actually kind of come in and come out. I know it sounds gross, but it's better than them chewing through a $400 or $500 backpack. And you wouldn't think that they could chew through zippers, but they can, that are leaving the zippers open, so that won't happen with you. As a side note, there was a hiker that this happened to. It was actually on a shakedown hike. Mice had eaten through his zipper and on into his backpack, and what he didn't know until the next day was the mice had chewed through both sides of the zipper, and there was no way for him to close his backpack. He had to duct tape his backpack together. That's not going to happen to every hiker. I'm just sharing with you what I know. Georgia and North Carolina are fabulous about having bear hangs and privies available at almost all of the shelters. Not having to hang a bear bag is a real plus. When you're freezing cold and you're out there trying to hang a bear bag and your fingers just don't want to work and all you want to do is get out of the rain or the wind, it's nice to be able to have those bear hangs that are available, and the privies as well. Digging through hard dirt to try and go to the restroom is a challenge. Those privies are a privilege and an honor to have out there as well. There's this thing called hiker midnight, and that's an interesting term. By the time it turns dark and you get ready to go to bed, that's typically hiker midnight. Y'all need to be aware that not everybody honors hiker midnight or is aware of hiker midnight. I'm kind of the manners police, and so my philosophy has always been to try and behave in a manner that makes other people feel comfortable around me, or that I don't make them feel uncomfortable. And I wouldn't say that that is an overly prevalent thought process when for some people that are hiking the AT. Some of them will come dragging in at 10 o'clock, some of them at midnight, because they wanted to hike so many miles that day. And you can understand why they wanted to achieve what they wanted to achieve, but I think that a little bit of courtesy and trying to be polite to others that are there, and not just, you know, coming in, slinging everything down, and making a lot of noise to get your food ready, and using your headlamp and, you know, shining it into somebody's face and everything in the shelter, it's actually kind of rude. If you come in after hiker midnight, just try and be considerate of those around you, and think about the fact that they may have already been asleep, and that you coming in and throwing your gear, you know, all over and trying to make dinner and cutting and laughing and cutting up. It's, you know, maybe save that for another time and just let them get the sleep that they're wanting to get, because they're tired and they've hiked all day as well. Hand in hand with hiker midnight are those individuals that want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to start hiking. That's a noisy time. It's a noisy time, and a lot of hikers don't want to get up until 6. And so the 4 o'clock people, I heard a lot of negative feedback towards the people that were getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I would just share that, you know, maybe try and be as prepared as you can if you're going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And for those of you that are using headlamps, please put on your red light instead of your, you know, your bright light, because nobody wants that shining down in their face whenever they're trying to sleep. No bueno. Tent light. I've had several of you ask me about the little tent light, and I'm going to put a little insert here. That little tent light was awesome. I would not get rid of that thing for the world. It illuminated the inside of my tent just enough to where I didn't have to be wasting batteries on my headlamp or my flashlight, depending on which one I was carrying, because I switched them out a couple of different times to see which one worked best for me. And also when you go to the privy, you've got your headlamp or your flashlight and you go. But when you come back, you know, if there are a lot of people around or you're kind of in a very remote area, the illumination from your tent kind of leads you back home like a beacon. And a lot of, you know, seasoned hikers are going to think that that's not necessary, and it's not necessary. It's a nice luxury item. It weighs less than a half an ounce, and using that little lamp was awesome. I enjoyed it very much, and I would not change a thing. Toilet paper. Don't run out of toilet paper when you're on the trail. It's not good. And yes, that did happen to me. And yes, there was a hiker there whose name was Pink, and he decided that he was more than happy to share his toilet paper with me, and I was very grateful to receive it. Plan ahead. You may need to use more than you think you need. Safety. Let's talk about safety for a minute. If you followed my videos, you know that I had a young man that gave me a hard time on the trail during the first half of the Smokies. He was a drug abuser, and there were a couple of different instances where I felt like my physical being was in jeopardy. I came off trail after I had gone up Clingman's Dome and skipped the last half of the Smokies so I could be relocated. And the reason why was because the young man that was giving me a hard time wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to stop taking drugs. And so I went on ahead and I got myself out of that situation. There are drugs on the trail. The drugs that are out on the trail are pot, meth, mushrooms, and cocaine. And so that is what I was told by the people that were actually using the drugs, because they are not ashamed of it at all. You know, pot, I tried to wink at a little bit because a lot of people were taking it for medicinal purposes, truly. There were a lot of veterans on trail, a lot of veterans that had PTSD or had head injuries, and it was prescribed to them, and some others that were using it for that purpose. I didn't have a problem with that at all. Not only that, but it is legal in some states. And so the issue with pot was, for me, was not so much that people were smoking it, it was that people were smoking it in the shelter where I was. If they wanted to do that, they needed to go out into their own space and be able to do that and not invade the space of so many others, because that's just what they wanted to do. The other drugs I felt were problematic for me, and I did not enjoy being around those. So you just have to kind of make up your mind before you go that, first of all, you know that you're aware, you know they're there. You have to kind of have a plan on what you're going to do if somebody decides that they're going to not act properly. And you need to be able to understand that just because you don't want the drugs to be there doesn't mean that they're not going to be there. They're there, be prepared. And I wish somebody had shared that with me. I still would have done my through hike, but at least I would have been informed. It was very discouraging, frustrating, challenging, and infuriating at times what I witnessed while I was on trail in this particular regard. It seems as though the more and more that you hike northerly, the less and less there is, but it is still there. I just want you to be aware. And not be like I was, where I was like deer in the headlights. What do you mean there's drugs out here? I just had no idea. That's a part of safety. And so the other part of safety that I want to share is a friend of mine, Ron Brown, who was a Georgia State Park manager as well as a trail angel. He's hiked the AT several times, and he does shuttle services now. When he was giving me a shuttle, he had also done my shakedown hike, so we had gotten to know each other fairly well. We had shared a lot of information with each other, and on the last shuttle, he said, Nonnie, you know, you're a really sweet woman, and I just want to ask you this question. And I was like, well, gosh, thank you. Okay, what do you want to know? And he said, if people ask you along the trail what shelter you're going to stay in that night, do you tell them? And I said, well, yes. And he said, and if people ask you if you're hiking solo, do you tell them that you're hiking solo? And I said, well, no, I don't know how I can't think of how I answer that question, but I don't come straight out and say I'm hiking solo. He said, please don't do that. I've had to relocate 2 women on trail for giving out too much information. What you need to be doing is you need to learn to tell a story. And I said, tell a story? What kind of story do you want me to tell? He said, what you need to say when people ask you where you're staying is, my family is ahead of me. We have not decided where we're going to spend the night. We're just going to see how far we can get today. And he said that he had had to relocate 2 women over his many, many years of shuttling because they gave too much information and it became problematic. And those women needed to be relocated further on down the trail so they didn't have continued problems with the person that was around them. He just suggested that that was a better response than how I was answering the question. So the information I'm trying to share with you is, please do not let people know, unless you know them, please do not let people know exactly where you're going to be staying, how long it's going to take you to get there, or that you're hiking solo if you're a female. It's just probably not in your best interest to do so. It's just a safety mechanism. So hopefully that will help somebody. It was monumentally interesting to me that there was alcohol on trail. And so that was out there too. And most of the people that were drinking were actually pretty responsible and polite. I did have to laugh at 3 hikers that came through. They were through hikers. And I had already set up in my shelter, and there were several others there. And these 3 came in. They were just as cute as they could be. And after it had turned dark, which was hiker midnight, and everybody else was getting ready to bed, they decided that they wanted to go on ahead and start drinking. So they had their 6-pack of beer and proceeded to go on ahead and drink. They had carried a 6-pack of beer in their backpack. I was astonished at this. And then after that, they had a squishing contest where they were banging their feet down on the cans as hard as they could to squish them because they didn't want them to take up too much room in their backpacks. And I'm thinking, okay, you had full beers in your backpack. What difference does it make? But it was funny, and they were really sweet young adults. So, you know, that was not a big deal, but the drugs were a problem for me. That's all I have to share in this video. I hope that something I have said is helpful and answered questions that have been asked of me. Y'all take good care, and I'll see you in my next video.